Housing in America.
Yeah,
That's a large topic. We may want to actually do a whole show on that, but this is like a precursor to such a show. So
yeah, that's exactly how I feel. I didn't know you were going to say that, but yeah, covering this, it turns out to be huge, a huge issue, and multifaceted, and trying to find info about it. Even it's kind of, there's so many things going on
yeah,
that is not at the top of the feeds. You got to search for the housing detail, which is means we couldn't get everything together in 1 week.
yeah.
But yeah, so we got the Bates Hotel in the middle there, up in
Oh,
the
that's what
upper
it
right.
is.
I've
I
actually,
knew it. It looked familiar.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And then on the upper right, that's in North Seattle somewhere. I've actually driven by it, and if you really want to know that it's in Seattle, that cedar fence gives it away. That's totally
Nice.
Northwest,
Yeah.
Pacific Northwest, right there. And we've got some other, housing issues. So yeah, what are we going to talk about? How are we going to cover this, Amos? Let's go to the next slide, because yeah, we've got the eviction crisis, we've got the perennial affordability crisis, and then we have another one which I came up with, and I'm just calling it quality of life. And what that refers to is, we do housing wrong. Our buildings consume massive amounts of energy. They're built in the wrong places architecturally. I mean, you know, my first inclination in life is I wanted to be an architect. It didn't work out, because it turned out, you need a whole bunch of education I couldn't get. But I thought I could change the world, because I realized, that, I thought it'd be a good profession, because, if you build things right, that does affect how people live, and you could make things better. And then later I find out in life that no, architects only do what they're supposed to do. So they're, the rich guy tells you to build a house of cards, you build a house of cards, whatever, they're just technicians in many ways. But, and that's just kind of a long ramble. So let's get back to the eviction and affordability crisis, which is, that's something we can really sink our teeth into, and this one right here, so I decided I was look for a rent in an apartment, and in Seattle. And so I got, where would I want to live? Well, if I pretended I had a job, say as a baggage handler working at the airport. And so the area I picked to look for an apartment was exactly in between, halfway in between Seattle and Tacoma, which are both big cities. And they're kind of like Minneapolis and St. Paul. They run together. You can drive down the street into one, pass into one, into the other without really knowing it. And anyway, so the actual city is Des Moines. So, this is not, say, I wouldn't say it's undesirable, but it's not central, okay? It's not where your premium commute is going to come from. It's a good place. If you work at the international airport, it would be a nice commute. So that's why we picked it. And so, what would, if you're working at the airport and how much are you going to get paid? If you got a $20 an hour job, that's probably pretty good. You might only be making 15, depending on what you do. But let's take a look at this. This is a 2-bedroom apartment. I'm sure most of the audience knows what kind of apartment this is. And maybe some of us have lived in something very much like this before. And the rent is going for $1,800 a month, almost $1,900. And so if no matter what job you have, that's costing you almost $11 an hour. If you're working a 40-hour week, is going just to pay for your 2 bedrooms. And yeah, and
It's more than a
and
half
then
of
people renting
your
a
income
house.
if
Oh
you're
my
working.
gosh.
Yeah, and
What's
that's
that?
more
What's
than
that?
half. That's more than 50% of your income compared to your proposed salary that you're
Well, yeah, but
suggesting.
you just don't eat, you know,
Yeah,
and and stay naked in the apartment so your clothes don't wear out and you can wear them outside. That's the American way. You just have to adapt. I'm being facetious, of course. Yeah, so yeah, that's totally unaffordable. I mean, yeah. And then if you get into, say you've got a family and so you need more room, and you've got to rent a house. Well, how much is that going to cost? Well, okay, now this house is the closest house to me that is for rent. It's a little over a mile away by the way of the crow. And I live in a suburb, so that speaks to something right there. That speaks to the fact that there are almost no rental houses available, and that the rents are astronomical. And yeah, I would not want to be looking for a place to rent. And so this thing is renting for $4,000 a month. And so that would only cost you $23 an hour out of your paycheck if you worked a 40-hour week. And the important thing about my calculations there is just to show that, this math doesn't work for the average person who has an average job and is just trying to get by. Yeah, what are you going to eat? What are you going to wear? Are you going to have any fun? No, you're just going to pay all your money out for rent or a mortgage, because the housing prices have just gone out of sight.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge problem. And want to mention the Supreme Court's action.
Oh, are we back to the court again? Oh, yeah.
We're back to this stinking court.
No, yes, this compassionate court that's so concerned with American, values and the welfare of its citizens. Yeah, they're throwing people out on the street. I read a few different things about this, and one thing I was reading was about a professor, and he's describing an experience with one of his law students, and they find this guy, and he's got like 5 kids, which is not really very smart, but whatever. He's got young kids, boys, and he's a single dad, and he's behind on his rent, and he's being evicted, and so he's eligible for rent relief. And so he didn't even know he could get this but somehow he got hooked up. So he's down there at some office, and he's going through check boxes and with the help, and so they apply for this for him, and as soon as he gets it, it gets taken away, because the Supreme Court came out with their decision, and they they stopped the eviction protection. And so that's
and we
a
don't
horrible
know yet
situation.
the actual numbers that found themselves out on the streets. We're going to have to follow up with that, but it's certainly a high number. It's disturbing that they can just do this. And one thing though to mention, when they did the moratorium extension, it was considered quite a victory for the progressives, and in a way it was, because they managed to prolong this, even if it just added in practice 3 weeks to that protection. But nevertheless, there was no certainty that the Supreme Court would rule the way they did end up ruling. But either way, it did not solve the problem. The problem is underlying, and the minute that eviction moratorium expired, even if it was in half a year, what then? There was the rental coverage, that the monies for during the pandemic that were supposed to solve the issue did not. It was greatly a disaster the way they rolled it out, and we still were going to face huge mass evictions once whenever that expired. So the problem is far beyond that, and it needs to be addressed on a much more fundamental level. All it did was buying time.
And then there's the relief that has not been distributed. It's a horrible situation. Yeah. And the decision was issued, the deadline happened at the same time federal unemployment benefits ran out. So, Biden's going to, I got to thinking, basically he kind of flubbed the Afghan withdrawal. And now that federal unemployment benefits have run out with really no change in the economic picture. There are claims that there are more jobs, but I'll call bullshit. That's bullshit. And Yeah, the government's acting like the pandemic's over. I mean, and I say that in contradiction because I know Biden came out with a plan, which I need to find out more about. But yeah, we're not ready for this. So
And the situation currently is such that 95% of um, all U.S. counties can't afford one bedroom rental on a minimum wage, which, when you think about it, is crazy. If you work, you're supposed to be able to live somewhere. Uh, this
cardboard box.
Yeah, this caused roughly 500,000 people to be homeless. I think it's over 500,000 now, and that's really bad. And here's a picture of what it happened in New York in the last 10 years. Look at how the number of homeless just skyrocketed, and this is even before the pandemic. This doesn't even take the pandemic into account. So the situation is just, it gets more worse and worse.
Yeah, so I found a website that there's some protest being organized, against, to support the rent issue. You know, I don't know that it's going to get a lot of traction though, because property is everything in America. And what the Supreme Court has done is they're saying that, the property rights of people owning property are more important than, the welfare of the people renting places, renting the property. And, there's so many of us that are invested in, well, why don't those people get a job? What's the matter with them? What are they drinking all their money, or what's the matter? What, are they stupid? The number of things that are going to come to mind to justify the the tragedy of it, is just enormous. The tricks that people will play to make their mind say that this is all okay. Because hey, wouldn't we all like to have a extra 2-bedroom property that we could rent out to someone, make a little extra money, um, but the fact is, rent's exploitive. Most people renting, they're renting because they don't have the money to buy a place. It's not like they're made out of money. They can just pay whatever the market demands, and that's always been the perennial problem in America is that, it's a market controlled system. So the rents in America are always on the edge of what people can pay. And so then the pandemic comes along and we get in trouble. And then, our whole sense of fairness and what's right and wrong gets challenged.
And I speak with conservatives occasionally, and they see the renting community as a lazy community that's basically using money to buy luxury goods while not paying the landlords. And I don't think that portrayal is something that is the norm. In fact, I think
Well, it's ridiculous. Anybody who's ever been a renter knows you pay your rent first.
yeah.
That trumps going to the movies. That
the claim was that the protections that were given to people justified their mishandling of money, that they basically used it up on other stuff, on cars and whatever, and instead of paying rent, and that they're still in this situation where they can't afford the rent at this point. And these people also think that people prefer rent than ownership, because it removes the responsibility from handling any things related to the property. What I can say about it is that unfortunately the whole concept that was promoted previously with regards to the American dream in ownership kind of got deflated with the fact that that has not worked either, with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and all of this mortgage extension policy that provided mortgages to people who couldn't afford it, and caused them eventually to lose their property after paying a significant amount of it to the banks. So this has all the actions that have been taken previously in the U.S., or not all, but the ones in the last few decades have been catastrophic, have not led to a solution, and we need to look for a solution in other places, not the way I think we need to completely deconstruct the way real estate is seen in this country, and this comes from a realtor.
Well, I'm going to agree with you. It reminds me of something I saw a few months ago it was about, I think it was Australia or New Zealand. I think it was Australia. And like 30 years ago or so, any Australian could go to their post office and get a home loan at a very reasonable rent, because the Australian government believed that people should own homes. Oh, what a concept. That would make for a better society. Yep. And so things weren't essentially, the mortgage market was not market driven. And then what happened was, it was during the Thatcher Reagan years, when people lost their minds and capitalism went on steroids, is that was turned into a market-based system, and then through the subsequent years, what happened right away, but through the years it just got worse, is that prices just went astronomical, and to the point, so people in Australia have just as much trouble buying a house now as we do, because the bankers got in charge of the whole thing. So yeah.
And here's another thing, like here's a lady saying, my rent has gone up by 20%, but it's too expensive to move. What am I supposed to do? And the guy just says, looks like you'll be staying and paying. And
that's your SHOL.
And that is the problem with these different government things, is also that, like Barbara says, I saw that the USDA had 0 down loans for low income and poor people, but then discovered that you would not be able to apply directly to the USDA, but had to go through a broker that charged $7,000 an application fee. I'm not familiar with that in particular, but I trust that that's the case if you've experienced that, and it is frankly not that different from a lot of these attempts, even during the mortgage crisis, where there were some solutions, but you had to jump through hoops or had certain conditions that kind of made it very unlikely applied to those applications. So yeah, that's part of the problem. That's part of the problem. And here's one tying it to the recent
housing crisis is underwater.
Housing crisis is underwater, and literally, and it's just one crisis on top of another, and we seem to be like stuck under all of this insanity. Here's a short video that I found really, really good about the housing crisis by Blumauer, and Representative Blumauer, and he's tackling this. He wrote a report called Locked Out, Reversing Federal Housing Failure and Unlocking Opportunity, and the link is there on the screen. Shortened link. You can type it in and go there, but let me play the video that he shot.
America has a housing crisis. Let me provide you with a few numbers. According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, for housing to be considered affordable, people should pay at most 30% of their income in housing. If you pay more than 30%, you are considered cost burden. If you pay more than 50%, you are considered.
Sorry.
Yeah.
America has a housing cost burden. If you pay more than 50%, you are considered severely cost burdened. Today, nearly half of renters are cost burdened, and nearly a quarter of renters are severely cost burdened. Rent is usually the first thing a family pays. If you're paying half your income in rent, you're forced to choose between food, utilities, transportation, to say nothing about health care. Yet today, rents are rising faster than incomes. Low income and communities of color are being displaced by gentrification. Last year, more than 550,000 people experienced homelessness every night. And for extremely low income renters, there is a shortage of 7 million affordable renter homes. In 1948, Eleanor Roosevelt led the United Nations to adopt a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 25 of that declaration includes housing as a basic human right. But the United States hasn't ratified that declaration, and to this day fails to live up to those standards. That is unacceptable, and it's no accident. It's the result of decades of deliberate choices from policymakers to segregate housing, and more recently, to reduce the federal government's partnership for affordable housing. The federal government has long provided a home for some, often at the expense of others. Communities of color were systematically denied wealth-building opportunities in the form of property ownership and faced blatant discrimination in accessing housing. By the end of the 20th century, Congress and the Nixon and Reagan administrations systematically shifted federal housing policies to produce less housing, focused on rental assistance rather than construction, and ultimately all were less impactful. The effects of these decisions linger today. The federal government needs to get back into the game of housing policy and treat housing like the fundamental human right that it is, and we know it should be. I recently released a report detailing some of these challenges and potential solutions, titled Locked Out: Reversing Federal Housing Failures and Unlocking Opportunity. The proposals are simple. We should begin by fully funding all public housing capital maintenance needs, repealing the outrageous cap on public housing construction, and building millions of new homes for low-income people. We need to double homelessness assistance funding, permanently fund the federal government's interagency response to homelessness, and expand legal assistance for people facing evictions, and promote housing first policies that give people a home without preconditions. We cannot make people with serious challenges jump through unnecessary hoops. We should create a renter's tax credit or make Section 8 vouchers an entitlement program like food assistance or Medicaid. At the same time, we should commit to building more affordable housing through the Housing Trust Fund and the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit. No matter where you start in life, everyone should have a chance at home ownership. The mortgage interest deduction, America's most expensive housing policy, should be converted to a tax credit that is more fair and available to all. And Congress should atone for past sins by creating a new restorative justice home loan guarantee program and reinstating a tax credit for first-time home buyers. It has been more than 50 years since Lyndon Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act, but housing discrimination remains. The federal government should finalize the affirmative Furthering Fair Housing Rule, prohibit all forms of housing discrimination, and remove housing barriers for people with criminal records. We should double enforcement funding so landlords are actually following the laws on the books. Some may look at these recommendations and say they are too expensive or not within our capacity. But the cost of inaction is far greater. We must not deny another generation the wealth-building opportunity that comes from home ownership. The federal government has ignored this human rights crisis for too long. Now is the time to get to work.
Very good.
Yeah,
I like
so
that.
the
You mentioned
highlight-
housing first. I mentioned that last week. You know, you help people, then you address their issues, but
Right.
you get them what they need out of the gate. That's a better way to go.
And the
than what we
highlight
do.
the highlight there is that it is considered a human right. It's in the human rights bill that the U.S. has not ratified, and
Yes,
so it is an
healthcare
essential,
and housing, both in there.
considered by the world as an essential. But nevertheless, it's not treated that way in the United States. And there are examples of public housing and other housing assistance around the world, models that work, and public housing does not have to be horrible. With that said, there's still, that doesn't mean that you can't have people investing in real estate, but the way we have it now, the investment aspect is considered prioritized over the livelihood of people, the life of people that depend on that type of housing, and the housing market is really like the developers have been developing mostly for the luxury market because it pays better, and not for low housing public, which is a problem that relates to the commoditization of the real estate. And that is a huge problem, because there's no shortage of housing in the top luxury market, but there's definitely lack of housing for the people at the bottom of the scale. So it like we saw, if you pay more than 30% or 50% in a lot of cases, then that's not okay. And
Right. Those numbers come from, the American dream, if it worked,
Yeah.
which, and we know it doesn't work, but ideally, I recall conventional advice was once that you only bought a house that was 5 times or less your annual income, right? So if you made, say, $100,000 a year, which is a lot of money, you could buy a $500,000 house. But, most Americans, I would guess that would put housing prices is maybe about $200K for an average house through the nation. And, it's at least double that. So, we are, as he refers to, cost burdened. And if it was at what you could afford, your income over 5 years, what that means is that you can tighten your belt, you can eat beans instead of steak, you can, make concessions and still maintain your lifestyle, like going to the doctor if you're sick, that would be maintaining your lifestyle. But, if it gets over 30%, no, you're all your money's going to pay rent, and you're poor. You may be living, the only time you're rich is when you're sleeping.
Yeah, and Tim Buck says overburdened living costs are the new slavery. Reminds me of that old Tennessee Ernie Ford song, I owe my soul to the company store.
That's a good song.
Yeah. And there are more solutions. I mean, there's no lack of possible solutions, including a renter's bill of rights, so that renters are more protected. Right now, there's very little protection, and it's not federally enforced, so you have different laws in different locales. In some places, they're more protected. In some cases they're less. the decommodification of basic housing is essential. Because, like we said, if developers don't build enough housing for housing the poor or middle class people, then that's going to reflect
when money makes
costs.
the decisions, people are going to suffer. You've
Yeah.
got to have higher priorities than the financial bottom line when it comes to housing.
And it's not the same as any other product. It's obviously just like with healthcare, with people's lives depend on it, with people's health depend on it. It's not just a commodity. It's way beyond that. So it can't be treated as if it's just another tool of investment, of making money. And with that said, there are, if you did want to invest and you did want to keep that, there's solutions for that as well. I mean, there's a real estate, a rate, what's called a rate. It's a real estate investment trust where you and others purchase property together. And to take that to the next level, it would be possible, in my opinion, to use it in a blockchain, and that is something we will talk. That's my segue to also talk about our upcoming show, which is going to be a really interesting one. And me and Keith might disagree on that, but that's going to be an interesting discussion.
Probably will.
Yeah, about cryptography. Cryptocurrency. And all the aspects around it. So that's going to be next Wednesday evening. We postponed it. We had some issues with guests, but we're going to do it one way or another, with or without the guest, on Wednesday. So you could use a blockchain to fragmentalize the profits and the expenses that are associated with large building developments and rentals, and thus deconnect between the landlord and the management of that property.
I don't know what's magical about a blockchain, but we'll be saving that for Wednesday.
Yeah. And then you have community land trusts, where you would have money put aside so that other developments could be bought and converted to public housing. Finally, there could be a first refusal to buy from provided to tenants. If a landlord wishes to sell the house, it should be the prerogative of the tenant to be able to purchase it first before it goes on the market. So that's a little tricky, but there are tricky issues with that. But that's another thing to look at. Well, that's anything else you wanted to add about this topic at this point, Keith?
Well, no, just housing's right up there with food, shelter, and clothing. And like I agree with you, the market can't provide. Just an unregulated market cannot meet housing needs. And when money makes the decisions, and that's the only consideration, people are going to get left out. So there have to be better ways than what we're doing. There are better ways than what we're doing.
Right.